able to be here this evening, but I want to thank him for the work that he has done to help facilitate this program. I'd also like to thank Susan and Lori for the registration table and for helping with the food nosh that we'll have at the end. Thank you to Rabbi Talia, our event coordinator for Mosaic Law. She's been invaluable. And for Karen Rubin, our executive director. For Katya Kemmler, thank you for baking all the brownies that you will enjoy afterwards. I'd also like to recognize Rich Desmond, our county supervisor. Thank you for coming and supporting our community. JCRC's role is as a community convener and our voice, and we speak out. And so hopefully you will be joining us in speaking out and not staying silent. Thank you for the Federation for sponsoring and reminding attendees of their roles in coordinating information and response when, unfortunately, incidences do occur, which you just shared with us some that have. We have a handout that I hope all of you got. If you did not, please let me know. That will give you some phone numbers and web resources. Thank you, Willie. I believe that you were instrumental in putting that together with Jason. Barry, yes? Great. And I would like to now introduce our first speaker. Teresa Drenick is the interim director of the ADL Anti-Defamation League of Central Pacific Region, where she is dedicated to combating anti-Semitism, hate, and extremism. Teresa joined ADL in 2021, and after a 30-year career as a prosecutor in Alameda County. It's my pleasure to present Teresa this evening.
All right. Thank you, Randy. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you for coming out on a Monday evening when it's 92 degrees at 6 o'clock in the evening. I was really thrilled to be invited to be here this evening by Randy and JCRC to talk about what we're seeing at ADL in terms of the rise in anti-Semitism, and then talk not so much to you as with you about what you're seeing and what are ways that as a community we can respond to the rise in anti-Semitism and hate, as well as an individual, whether you're a student at high school, middle school, a college student, or somebody walking down the street that is confronted with it. Because one of the questions that we are asked always is, what do we do? How do we respond? What do we say? Do you have any advice on that? And so I'm really hoping that we can actually workshop that a little bit as I get further into my presentation. And then I also will leave you with several resources that ADL has to offer on several different fronts. Let me move this just a little bit. So as I go through my slide deck tonight, a lot of what I'm bringing to you are images that illustrate some of the points that I'd like to talk through with you. And just fair warning that some are disturbing and will enrage you, but I think it's important that we look through these together. A little bit about me. As Randy said, I am relatively new. I've got 2 years this month at ADL, and I came here after serving as a prosecutor in downtown Oakland in Alameda County for 30 years, where I spent the vast majority of my career working with survivor victims of sexual assault and domestic violence, and also prosecuting hate crimes. So the experiences that I had there, I brought with me in terms of working with the community, working with people who have been victims of hate, victims of crime, or witnesses to hate and crime. I also come with a very personal love of the work of ADL. Both my mother and my father are Holocaust refugees, and most of my family did not make it out of Austria and the Czech Republic. So I grew up very much in a family of Holocaust survivors and with the ghosts of those who perished. So for me, this was really a coming home to come to ADL, and it is always a coming home for me when I get to come into different synagogues, different temples, and meet the congregation and meet the rabbi and meet the people who make these places tick. It definitely, it fills my soul. So I want to start, and we have a little funky setup here. So I've got my notes, and then the computer is there that will forward the screen. So I hope that we stay in sync with each other. But I'm going to start with a video that I know that you have all seen and heard, but it really kind of level sets where we as a community have been since about 2016. So I'm going to play a very short clip. Okay, so we all remember that march in Charlottesville that really was the opening of a Pandora's box. And I'm not saying that anti-Semitism wasn't already on the rise or already present, but it exploded into the media, and it exploded throughout social media, and it was as though a lid was taken off a box, and suddenly we are seeing it and hearing it everywhere. And the chant, "Jews shall not replace us," was the clarion call of the great replacement theory that so many on the far right extreme hold, that white Christian America is being replaced by immigrants, replaced by people of color, replaced by Jews, and that the Jewish community is puppeteering and controlling what is happening. And that is really at the bedrock of extremism and at the bedrock of the anti-Semitic incidents that we are currently seeing. But I also want to take you through the startling visual of how consistent this hatred has been for century and millennia. So briefly, anti-Semitism today, the way that ADL is defining anti-Semitism, which I know is a debate amongst many in our community and many outside, that we are saying it's the marginalization and or oppression of people who are Jewish based on the belief in stereotypes, myths, and disinformation about Jewish people, Judaism, Zionism, and Israel. As you know, ADL is a century-old, over a century-old organization whose founding principle was to fight the oppression of Jewish people, but also to fight for fair and just treatment for all. So we are an old civil rights organization. And in fact, this week we are celebrating our 110th anniversary. We were founded in 1913. So it's very important that anyone studying and talking about anti-Semitism sees the intertwining labyrinth of disinformation, understanding anti-Semitism as a form of oppression, but also this strange hatred that both punches up and punches down, meaning that that anger explodes at like the power, the control, the perceived rich of the Jewish people, and also punching down at the perceived, low opinion that many hold. So it punches up and it punches down. And also it has just, the impact is huge and sometimes actually outpaces the intent. Anti-Semitic attitudes are expanding like crazy. Well, let me go back to that other slide really quick. What you can see there, and I don't want to do too many graphs, but you can see the rise in anti-Semitism, our latest stats, and we do an annual audit in yellow there from this past year, 2022, and I can tell you that 2023 is outpacing so far. The incidents that we are tracking throughout the country are just up, 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 and then practically going 50% higher every year. We have a Center on Anti-Semitic Research, and recently we released a new study on attitudes towards anti-Semitism in the United States. We found that 20% of Americans believe in 6 or more anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, and we're going to talk about those in a moment. Kind of to put this in perspective, 3% of our population believe in all the tropes that malign the Jewish people. This might seem like a small number, but that adds up to approximately 10 million Americans, and that's more than the total number of Jewish people in the United States, similar to Kanye's Twitter following. Our audit of anti-Semitic incidents showed that actual hate incidents of anti-Semitism, not just bias, saw a 36% increase. And it's the highest number that ADL has seen since we began tracking in 1979. We are seeing everything from vandalism to leaflet drops to signs over freeways to actual assault and attempted murder. And I know that we're going to hear a bit more from our U.S. Attorney on this. Let's talk a little bit about the myths and stereotypes that are so prevalent. And where do they come from? We've got disloyalty, deicide, blood libel, power, greed, Holocaust denial and distortion, and virulent anti-Zionism. I won't go through all of them, but some I feel like we really want to dig into. First of all, the myth of disloyalty. When you look at this slide on the, forgetting to go up, there we go. So from 1899, that's a poster from the Dreyfus Affair in France. From a show of hands, who's familiar with the Dreyfus Affair? Okay, almost everybody. Mr. Dreyfus was a French Jewish army officer who was convicted erroneously of treason. And the fact that he was Jewish played a very central, if not the central, role in that they believed his loyalty did not lie with France because of the fact that he was Jewish. We then see from 2019 and moving into 2021, these memes that went around on social media blaming the Jews for 9/11, and this conspiracy theory they featured prominently in anti-Semitic propaganda that was spread by white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and other hate groups, both in 21 and 22, and we're still seeing it spread today. Do we move forward? The myth of deicide. So it's a word that some people have never heard of, yet it is pervasive in our history. That is the myth that it was the Jewish people who were responsible for the death of Jesus. On the left, you see an illustration from the 13th century in a manuscript of the Bible showing 2 Jews about to be put to death as revenge for the death of Jesus, who looks on from above. The middle is from 1450, is a German woodcut depicting Jews being burned alive for the same alleged crime. And then from 2008, we see here the myth of deicide and imaginary Jews as Christ killers as a protest of what is happening in the Middle East. So you see that this same myth is being used and recycled and re-upped to foment and foster hatred towards the community. The myth of blood libel, that the Jewish people kill children and use their blood either in ceremony or to make matzah. On the far left is a 1493 woodcut of the story of Simon of Trent, an Italian child whose death was blamed on the Jewish community. In the center is a graphic from an article published by Iranian state media, and the title of it is, quote, "Who are human history's most bloodthirsty people?" The article then accuses Jews of killing non-Jews to use blood in ritual. And on the right is a meme from last year that you can, puzzle out yourself, but clearly you see that it's the Palestinian conflict and Jewish men using their cups to take the blood. The myth of power and control, which Kanye and other notable figures in the media have really reached into in the last couple of years, is also ancient. We see from 1898 here a cartoon in Germany depicting a massive octopus strangling the globe with the Star of David above his head. We see on the far right a tweet from an actress named Gina Carano. She was in The Mandalorian, which is a Disney program, and she was recently taken off Disney for her anti-Semitic comments that trivialize the Holocaust. But you can see it's an image of Jewish gentlemen playing Monopoly and controlling the world that way. These are myths that are propagated and kept alive by the type Tucker Carlson, Matt Gaetz, Senator Scott Perry, and others, and center into the Great Replacement theory of power. Greed. On the left, we have an Italian poster from 1944 entitled "The Way of the Red Sea is a Way of Blood." In the center is a trinket that we see sold today in Poland called "Jew with a Coin." And on the right is a meme from just last year that's pretty popular with teenage kids. So, like, my kids were not so long ago in high school and public high school in the Bay Area where pennies were being thrown at their feet. And this, you can see, the myth of greed continues. And finally, we talk about Holocaust denial, disinformation, and trivialization. From elected officials using and misusing the Star of David and the swastika during the pandemic to protest vaccination and masking requirements, to memes and outright denial by certain celebrities. And coupled, as was said earlier, with where we are in our timeline, that there are fewer and fewer eyewitnesses to the atrocities of the Holocaust who can speak about what is happening, and the rate with which this flies around the internet and fake news is convincing an entire new generation of young people that the Holocaust did not happen. So it brings us to, why are we seeing so many anti-Semitic incidents? Nearly all, and I'm sure that when you as members of this community can think, what has happened, what have you seen, what have you heard your children or your grandchildren or school teachers tell you about what they are witnessing, they all loop back to these age-old stereotypes that are finding new ways of dissemination and new homes in the iPhone, new homes on TV, new homes in movies, and new homes coming out of the mouth of elected officials and celebrities. So in California last year, ADL recorded 531 incidents of anti-Semitic incidents, and that includes crimes here in our state. 181 of those took place in Northern California, and 17 very serious incidents right here in the Sacramento and Davis areas. So, as a snapshot of what we have seen just in the last very short year in Northern California, and specifically mostly in this community, students at a middle school drew a picture of an oven, and above it wrote, "Burn them Jews." On the Israeli consulate in San Francisco, just April of this year, we had spray painted in red, "Kill Zionists." Last week, in Foster City Synagogue was vandalized with a swastika. And in April of this year, students at UC Santa Cruz found it appropriate to host a birthday party for Hitler, where they baked cakes and decorated them, as you can see on the far right there, with swastika. Here in Sacramento, I know that you all are aware of the bike path that goes, over the highway near Davis, UC Davis, on that 113 bike path overpass with the flyer banners that were held. We have had now several incursions into here in Sacramento, your city council meeting, as well as Walnut Creek, and the Sonoma Board of Supervisors, with people misusing and abusing their speaker card to spew violent anti-Semitic rhetoric. The Goyim Defense League, as you know, are dropping these flyers. A year and a half ago, students at Wheatland High School went to a party. The boys took off their shirts, the girls took off except for their bras, and they painted huge swastika and SS bolts on their bodies and then posted to social media. And it's hard to see what that is, but on the bottom right, that is a picture of a Elk Grove golf course where somebody carved an enormous swastika and the word F Jews in the grass of the golf course. So these are just a mere example of what we're seeing and having reported to us on a daily basis at the Anti-Defamation League. So what are we doing with you and for you and hopefully alongside you to combat anti-Semitism? Our role at ADL is we investigate, we advocate, and we educate. We have a center on extremism that investigates and responds to all reports of anti-Semitism and researches what is happening. We work with law enforcement officials, we work with schools, and we work with community. We advocate. We are oftentimes in Sacramento, in state capitals, and in the nation's capital, working on bills, everything from nonprofit security grants to get more money for synagogues to protect themselves and JCCs, and we are constantly in schools working with the K-12 teachers. But what can you do? So I have some jumping off points, but let me ask you this. Of the audience, can anybody share aloud something that has happened either to you or that you've witnessed in the recent past in terms of an anti-Semitic incident that you're carrying with you? Yes, ma'am.
Not too long ago, I think about 5 years ago, the imam at the local mosque in Davis called for Jewish women, children, men. It was terrifying for all of us. Quite a lot of us stood with placards by the farmer's market and said, this is not okay. We're frightened. And actually, our rabbi invited the imam to come over to our synagogue to meet him and to see his people, trying to reach out to some of the other mosques in the area so that people in our synagogue could meet people who are Muslim.
Thank you.
Get to know each other.
And how did you feel that worked?
Some people were
Thank you.
There were other people that were angry at the rabbi because they felt like he didn't do enough to, help us feel safe. Well, we're putting up a security fence, we're putting lighting around our facility at night. I mean, we have to find ways to make sure that we're safe.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Anybody else like to share an experience? Yes.
So it was about 2 years ago now, around our home, like across the street from us, it was FUCK Jews on a garage floor.
Uh-huh.
And so a couple of the houses near us had swastikas there. And it was probably directed towards me, it didn't like in our house. And so, I mean,
So, what I think is that, obviously the number one is that you need to stay safe. So if there's a person who's up in your face, a neighbor who you're afraid of, let law enforcement know always, and don't ever put yourself in harm's way. But when you feel comfortable and you think that it's like there's a microaggression, for example, is to stop and ask somebody what they mean. I get told a lot, for example, gosh, Teresa, you don't look Jewish. I get that all the time. And so to me, I want to stop somebody and say, well, what do you mean by that? Like, is that a compliment? Is that an insult? And, if there's a generalization there, like, are you talking just about me, or are you talking about all Jewish people? There's a way of stopping somebody and making them stop also and think, why did they say that? What did they mean? And sort of connecting that to a larger thought process. Another strategy is to explain the impact. Like, how did that comment affect me, and how did it affect the people around me? And I know we've got a couple, at least, students here of school age. Hi. So, and lots of times I'm in synagogue speaking just with teenagers in middle school and high school, and I've heard, that the kids will hear, you can't sit with us because you're Jewish, or even more subtle, like the pennies at the feet. And so it's really important that that is called out so that people they know that they cannot continue with that type of talk. Let's see, broaden it to universal behavior, and talk about how that hatred and that hate speech affects not just the Jewish community, but take it out to a broader meaning. Hope that I'm on the same. And connect it always, if you can, to a historical context. And talk about the fact that this is an age-old, and how it was the same, this type of rhetoric has not changed. Why all of this? Why is this so important? As we've talked about, the state of anti-Semitism right now in America, and the state of lack of knowledge about it and about the Holocaust is really startling. From a recent survey, we know that 31% of Americans don't even know what anti-Semitism is, and there's a startling number who have never heard of the Holocaust and cannot name a single concentration camp. And I know I'm running up on my time, but I just want to encourage you, I'm going to go quickly, to engage your community, bring speakers into your schools. For your synagogue, we have a specific program called Kulanu that brings programming and workshops in for the year. I'm happy to tell you more about that later. Respond on social media. Let the companies know when you see something that is against their policy. Let us know. We can help you in the fight to make them take it down. And then we have resources. We always encourage you to report to ADL because it helps us with our audit, and it helps us to help you in combating it. And I'm going to leave this as a big resource list that is hyperlinked to a lot of amazing places that we can bring to you, resources we can bring to you, and I'll send this after today so that it can be shared with everybody. And I think I've gone over my time, so thank you very much.
Before you walk away, does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask Teresa?
Yes.
I'm just kind of spitballing here. I feel that most of the time we are reactive as opposed to proactive. We write letters condemning things, we do that. And I believe that a lot of the people that hate Jews who spread all this are really thinking they're weak. They won't do anything. So what can we do to be proactive, and how do we, I understand people are afraid and they're entitled to feel that way, I get it, but I think saying that out loud to the people who are doing this to us is really detrimental.
So first of all, to be proactive, I think there is nothing more important than education. So whether it's kindergartners and, elementary age appropriate, middle school, high school, and into college, because that is where our young people are either going to learn or not learn how to hate or how to love. A lot of the kids who come from a household where they're hearing this kind of talk around the dinner table need to have that balanced out and confronted in school. So to me, the best way to be proactive is to work with our schools, bring in educators, bring in Holocaust speakers, and bring in not just about the Holocaust, but also programming about who are the Jewish people, who are we, what is our history, what is our culture, and to make sure that young kids get to know other kids who are Jewish and we're not like this foreign, scary other. And then in terms of being proactive and combating what is happening, I say yes, do it, but do it in a safe way. So it may be that you need to call in your U.S. attorney, your district attorney, your local law enforcement, resources like ADL, JCRC, the Federation, your rabbi, but I say don't stay silent in the face of it, because silence is in a way seen as acquiescence, so I say never stay silent. Yes?
So I always struggle with this one question, maybe you can help me, Teresa. When someone does an incident, for example, those banners that were over our freeway in Davis, I don't know whether to put that out into the media and repeat what they said on the banners, or if that makes it worse.
Yep. It's super interesting. I was just asked that question by a reporter who was that was writing up the story about the city council, and she asked me that exact same thing. She said, I don't want to give them a bigger platform. So my response to that is, yes, call it out, have the media report on it, but don't ever repeat their URL, don't give their website, and don't give their name. So when we get those awful GDL, Going Defense League flyer drops, and I talk about it to the media, I say it's a small, virulently anti-Semitic group, but I never call them out by name, and I always ask the media. Sometimes I've had to call up newspapers and say, please take down that photograph that you put up because it has their URL. Blur it out. So that is my response to that. I think that to stay silent is worse because it doesn't let the community, know that we all know that this is happening because it's not just the Jewish community that needs to know this, it's all of our allies need to know how horrible this is as well. So there's power in that, but there's also power in minimizing their ability to amplify themselves.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
We live with anti-Semitism quite some time ago.
Right.
Anti-Semites, I believe, from time immemorial, probably are not very different from, I don't know
to classify anti-Semites as a group. And what the answer that, and I think it's a really interesting question and one that I haven't actually heard before, but my knee-jerk reaction would be no, because anti-Semitism is coming from so many different sides. We're having far-right extremists, we're having people who we see huge upticks when there are conflicts in Israel and Palestine. And I think that we have, elected officials from all sides of the spectrum who, and like the way I envision it in my mind, are kind of the right and the left, and they're getting so far extreme that they're meeting down in the middle. But I think that there are groups that we say these are right-wing extremists and other types, but I don't know that you can classify them all as one.
The Middle East anti-Semites have to be separate.
Yeah,
Because they're essentially a political unit.
I agree.
The rest of the anti-Semites, even if we don't characterize them socially, has any intent that we may to characterize them intellectually. I mean, you've got so many that have an IQ of 130, we have just got an IQ of 45, and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we have to know who we're dealing with in terms of making an approach that might be effective.
So it's a really interesting question. I'm going to give you my business card, and we're going to email about this after. You're going to call me, and we're going to have a long conversation about this. It is.
That was great.
That
That
was
was
a great
great.
one.
Thank you.
And you stumped me.
Teresa, thank you so much. I really want to thank Teresa for making a trip from San Francisco and for coming today to be here with us and for sharing and educating and empowering us with some tools that hopefully we can use. Now I'd like to introduce Philip Talbert, is the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of California. He leads a 90-plus attorney office with locations in Sacramento, Bakersfield, and Fresno, serving over 8 million people. Mr. Talbert was nominated to the position by President Biden in April of 2022 and confirmed by the Senate in June of 2022, having served as both acting and interim U.S. attorney during previous presidential administrations. It is my pleasure to present U.S. Attorney Talbert.
Thank you, Randy. And I want to thank the JCRC and the Mosaic Law Congregation for inviting me to come to speak tonight. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be a part of your program. We are directly in this space. Hate crimes are a top priority of our office, have been, and will continue to be. And so I'd like to talk to you about that tonight, following some of Teresa's presentation, and talk a little bit more from the prosecutor's perspective, how these matters line up for potential criminal prosecution and other things. Let me first give you a quick description of my office, and let me just see if, did that bring up? Yeah. Well, and while they're playing with that, let me give you a little more piece of my own background. I've been a lawyer now for 30 years, or a little over 30 years, almost all of that for the U.S. Department of Justice. I started at what we call Main Justice in Washington, D.C. I had a couple different jobs there. I came out here now 21 years ago to be an assistant United States attorney, a job that I always aspired to be, and prosecuted cases in criminal court. I became the appellate and training chief for my office. Did that for a few years before I was selected by Ben Wagner, who was the U.S. attorney appointed by President Obama, I was chosen by him as his first assistant United States attorney, which is essentially the top career prosecutor or career attorney in the office. Just so you know, while the president appoints the U.S. attorney, every other attorney in the office is a careerist, is someone hired under and has civil service protection, stays one administration to the next without regard to politics. Of course, our office is completely nonpartisan. We do all of our work without regard to political favor or adherence. But the U.S. attorney personally is appointed by the president. And unfortunately, at whatever point when President Biden decides to leave, unless he fires me earlier, then I'll have to leave myself, and there'll be a new U.S. attorney appointed at that time.
Then you can come to ADL.
That's right. Keep a seat warm for me. All right. I see there's my title slide, and let me just go through. So easy to think about, we have 3 jobs as the U.S. Attorney's Office. Our main job, and kind of 3/4 of our workforce, prosecutes federal crimes. And for federal crimes, while I mentioned hate crimes is a top priority, other civil rights offenses, national security, public corruption, those are all kind of top priorities of the office, but relatively small number of cases. Our regular meat and potatoes, most of our cases fall by numeric, or by numbers, fall within 4 baskets. Violent crime, including gun crimes and illegal gun trafficking, child exploitation crimes, and you can't imagine how bad things have gotten with the internet, with the amount of production of new child exploitation material on that. And we investigate and prosecute all of that. Drug trafficking, and at drug trafficking our focus is mainly on the cartels, largely Mexican cartels, that are bringing large amounts of methamphetamine, fentanyl, and other dangerous drugs into our district and then distributing either within our communities or out across the United States because we're a transshipment district. And then 4th, all kinds of frauds, whether it's government fraud, including the latest thing was COVID relief fraud, billions of dollars cheated out of the state of California and the federal government by people who represent themselves as others, and other types of fraud too, and private frauds. Think of Ponzi schemes and other types of investment fraud. Those are the 4 main types of criminal cases that we prosecute, but of course we enforce all federal criminal law, and there's all sorts of different statutes on the books. Our second main function is to represent the United States in civil litigation. We sue on behalf of the United States. Think about some of our biggest cases recently have been negligently created wildfires that have burned up our national parks and national forests, and we sue to recover damages for the forest lost and also the firefighting costs. We also, on the defensive litigation side, we end up defending federal government agencies when they're sued. And federal agencies, whether it's the Postal Service or the VA hospital, can be sued for the same things that others in the private sector can be sued for: medical malpractice, sexual harassment at work, other types of civil torts. And then finally, our third main function is to collect debts to the government that are otherwise administratively uncollectible. So think about when we get restitution in a criminal case or a fine, or we asset forfeiture, things like that. We have a small group of attorneys and paralegals and staff working on recovering funds. So those are our 3 main functions. And let me just show you our district to give you an idea. So Randy mentioned how many people. We serve 8 million people across 34 counties. If you look at the state of California, it's already pretty large. We have almost half of California geographically that we're responsible for across 34 counties. Most federal districts, all of the country's divided up into 94 federal districts. We are one of those. Most federal districts are either very large geographically, like say Alaska, but not a lot of population, or they may have a large population like the Central District of California in Los Angeles, but in a fairly small space. Or think about Manhattan all by itself is the Southern District in New York, has a huge population but very small geography. We're one of the few federal districts that and it's really interesting for attorneys who work there, large geography, but also large population. And that's because our population's spread across a bunch of different cities. You know, you can think about Vallejo and Sacramento and Stockton and go all the way down Fresno and Bakersfield, lots of little cities, many of them very violent, so lots of violent crime. But then also our district is full of federal land. So things that happen on federal land where we have special federal jurisdiction all makes for a very interesting job as an assistant United States attorney or AUSA. Now, why do hate crimes matter so much? Why are they such a high priority for us? Well, the simple fact is that hate crimes are not just directed at an individual. Usually someone who commits a hate crime doesn't even know the victim. They are directing their crime really at the community that the victim is a part of, and to a certain extent at larger society that that community is a part of too. The United States is supposed to be a place where people are treated equally under the law, people live safely and are served by their government and served by their law enforcement, and there are and without regard to race, religion, national origin, gender identification, sexual orientation, all of those different characteristics, all of us are supposed to live equally free together. Frankly, like I said, I've been here 21 years in the Sacramento area. I was really happy that I came to this community. What I've seen as an assistant United States attorney and a U.S. attorney is a community that is incredibly diverse, but also in many ways tries to work together to solidify and accomplish that American dream. But there are always people and groups that are working against that. And so hate crimes and hate incidents are ways that these people and these groups try to say, not only, you know, am I attacking this one individual or this one house of worship, I'm attacking the community. And in fact, I'm attacking the very idea that America is a place for everybody, where a diverse group of people and a diverse group of communities can live in peace together. Now, what is, oops, went too far. There we go. Aha, okay. Need to look at the big screen, not the small screen. That's the next one. All right, so what is a hate crime? Now, in its simplest form, a hate crime is a crime that is motivated by some kind of bias. It doesn't have to be motivated by specific hate. Again, this is a bias against a group of people based on some characteristic, okay? Doesn't necessarily have to rise to the level of hate, but there has to be that bias component that motivates the crime. Now, I can tell you it would be a lot easier as a federal prosecutor if there was a federal statute that said if you committed a federal crime and you were motivated by bias, then that would be a hate crime, and there would be either some enhancement or it would be a longer sentence or something like that. The fact is the federal statutes governing hate crimes and civil rights generally grew up over a long period of time, and different political levels of support and deals were cut. So it's really a patchwork of statutes at the federal level, where there may be a very strong statute covering one type of conduct, but then it has only certain different aspects and characteristics that are protected, or there may be a little bit less strong statute that covers more types of characteristics. When I'm talking about characteristics, what I'm saying is everything from race and national origin to, as I mentioned, sexual orientation, gender identification, religion, and other groupings. So there's this patchwork of federal statutes. What that means is every time one of these potential hate crimes comes up, in order to look at it from a federal level and see, can we prosecute it from the U.S. Attorney's Office perspective, we need to do an analysis under the statute. We need to look at other cases and see what support there is for covering this particular conduct. Now, when There we go. When these matters come up, our main investigatory agency at the federal level is the FBI. We also work with local and state law enforcement agencies. So often when I hear about something that might be a crime here, and I will contact the FBI, make sure they know about it, or Sean Vassar, our community outreach specialist who's here with me tonight, will hear things from the community. We'll pass that along to the FBI to make sure they're aware. FBI is often in communication with local law enforcement, whether it's the local police or the county sheriff, whichever the jurisdiction is. We work hand in hand with the district attorney's offices in our district. I've got relationships with the various DAs. Often what will happen is, a crime will happen, it'll look like a hate crime. I'll ask the FBI to work with the locals to investigate. At some point, a decision will have to be made. Typically, we don't prosecute in both state court and federal court at the same time. We can under certain circumstances, but generally one or the other goes forward. And so we typically look at which, between California and the feds, which has the best statute given the conduct and given the person. Now, again, we're fortunate here in California. We've got a fairly strong hate crime statute statewide. So often the DAs are better positioned to prosecute a hate crime. Sometimes we are at the federal level. Sometimes we can get a longer sentence, or it's more certain that it fits within our definitions, but often it'll be the DA that we defer to, and they go forward with the prosecution. Examples of hate crimes. For us, the ones that we have prosecuted in the past typically fall within two different categories. One is assaultive conduct, where there's some kind of physical violence involved. The other is more property damage, vandalism type of conduct. So for assaultive conduct, we prosecuted, as an example, it wasn't anti-Semitism, it was a hatred of minorities that drove a skinhead to warn a Latino man to leave the neighborhood, get out of the neighborhood, move from the neighborhood of Oildale in Bakersfield. It was kind of a traditionally white working class neighborhood, had been diversified over time. He was angry about that. He yelled at the man. The man was in his own front yard with his family nearby. And then he pulled out his sawed-off shotgun and shot at the man. So fortunately, he didn't hit him. If he had hit him and hurt him, the DA probably would have taken the case, and it probably would have been a better state case. But because he missed, then it turned into a good federal case because he was using an unregistered firearm that he was not allowed to have, and he was committing a crime of violence during a hate crime, which for us, the hate crime, we fit within a denial of or interference with housing rights, because again, he was trying to get him out of the neighborhood. So in any event, we had evidence of motive, which I told you, it's not just the act itself, but we have to show it was motivated by something. One, that he said what he said in front of other witnesses. He also went the same day, drove down and shot out the window of a store owned by a Muslim man. Then he had all these great tattoos on his body identifying him as a white supremacist with a local white supremacist gang. So one example, we prosecuted him, took him to trial. He ended up 15 years sentence in federal prison, which he'll serve at least 80% of under federal guidelines. Let's see, let me make sure. Okay, so what do you do if you think that you might have witnessed or been victimized by a hate crime? Well, one, make sure you're safe. As Teresa said, call 911, get out, or call 911. But when you're in a safe place, something's happened, and we can only investigate the things that we hear about. So I'd encourage you to call both local police, and again, that's whether, it depends on where you live. Is it the sheriff that covers your territory, or is it the police chief? Call the locals, but also call the FBI. let the FBI know. They'll work through their, both agencies will work through their own processes, and eventually they'll work together and clue us in, both the DA and the U.S. Attorney's Office, into what's happened. 1-800-CALL-FBI, very easy to remember. If it's, language services, they speak a lot of different languages at that 800 number and can get you in the right spot. Now, make sure, okay, there we go. I'd encourage you to tell the police and the FBI not just about, you don't have to make the determination yourself, there's a hate crime, right? As I just mentioned to you, under federal law, it's something that we have to really carefully consider and do research on to see whether something qualifies as a federal hate crime or not. If you call about a hate incident, if you call about if you've been subjected to discrimination, and you call, then the police and the FBI know that something's going on. Now imagine, you may know what's happened to you, you don't know what's happening to other people. So the FBI may have an investigation of a group or an individual that your reporting can help further. Just as the sheriff or the police chief needs to know what's going on in their community so they can allocate resources, police resources appropriately as to what's going on. So I would encourage reporting, even if you're unsure something might be a hate crime. If it feels like you were targeted because of one of these reasons, whether it's anti-Semitism or one of the other bases, I'd encourage you to report that. Now, as I mentioned, there's all types of discrimination too, from housing discrimination to employment discrimination that can be based on these classifications. As I mentioned, we have a civil division in my office that works to combat denials of civil rights protections. So there may be something that you've experienced that we can do something about. And again, we have to know about it in order to respond to it. Now let me tell you about a couple groups that we have, one here in Sacramento and one new one in Fresno. For all of you, I came here in 2002, so I was not here for what's referred to as the Summer of Hate in 1999 when the Williams brothers firebombed houses of worship, including synagogues here in Sacramento, and killed a gay couple in Redding. But I know that my office at the time formed a hate crimes task force in the Sacramento area that has been meeting since then. And the hate crimes task force is essentially a group of community leaders meeting with law enforcement representatives from every level of government to talk about what's going on in the community and share information to the extent they can, and then talk about what's the path forward. So I've hosted the Sacramento Hate Crimes Task Force meetings for a number of years now as the first assistant and now the U.S. Attorney. I typically have the district attorney, the police chief, the sheriff, or representatives from those offices, as well as a representative from the FBI. And we'll start by sharing what we can about ongoing investigations. So you saw some of the things that have been happening locally. To the extent law enforcement can talk about those events and the investigations and what's being found, or explain if charges are brought or not brought and who's brought them and what the charges are, to the extent we can, we explain that. At the same time, it's a two-way street. So we want the community leaders to bring to us their concerns about what they're seeing in the community in this area so that law enforcement can essentially serve the people and know about what's going on. So we've had this in Sacramento, like I said, since around 2000. And just last year, I thought this has been such a powerful group and method that we launched one in Fresno, where our other main office is, with law enforcement and community leaders in Fresno. So we've been meeting in Fresno too for the Fresno task force, and that's up and running well. So Sean Vassar's contact information is down there. Sean's here in the front. If you'd like to participate in the task force, we're very open to new people coming in. If nothing else, you can get on our mailing list and get all sorts of things, information that we push out, and kind of watch as the task force goes forward. Let's see, before I'll take any questions, but before I do that, I did want to mention that some of the slides that Teresa showed reminded me of a visit that I made. I was back in DC with a lot of the other U.S. attorneys for a conference. Many of us went to the Holocaust Museum there. It was my first visit to the museum. I can tell you, as for those of you who have seen it, you know, it's a very moving experience. And after we took a private tour with someone who kind of walked us through and talked us through at the same time, which if you haven't done it, then I highly recommend that experience. But you come away, I mean, one, you come away with a lot of different feelings, but one definite feeling you come away with, particularly if you're a representative of the U.S. government with some discretion as to how the community is to be protected, is to think, you know, they could have done something. People could have done something there. And we need to do something here in the face of what we see here, because what we see here is what started the whole thing back then there. Now, I'll also mention that in May of this year, the president issued a national strategy for combating anti-Semitism. I won't say I've read the whole thing because it's very long and detailed. I've started reading it. It looks like it has all sorts of great ideas and requests and proposals, both for government agencies and also private individuals and community groups to follow. It does appear to be the first U.S. government-wide comprehensive strategy to combat anti-Semitism. It, you know, talks about awareness. It talks about security, particularly of houses of worship. It talks about standing together. And what I've seen in this community in particular, when I go to interfaith events and others, is that we are strongest here in Sacramento when we're all standing together. Whichever group is attacked or is targeted by a particular event, if we're all lining up shoulder to shoulder together, that's when we're strongest. And that to me seems the best way, actually a rather easy way, for us to fight back against anti-Semitism. Okay, so now I'll open up any questions for me before I turn it over to our professor. Yes?
Yeah, I have a question. I'd just like to say thank you. There were many of us here who experienced the circumstance in 1999 when you mentioned that you had started afterwards, but your office was extremely sensitive and very professional in working with our community. Mosaic Law Congregation, which I'm a member, was Zoom bombed during the pandemic. I have
that is great to hear. I'm glad you had that experience. I can tell you the one reason that I wanted to be the U.S. Attorney, because I could have been an AUSA and I could have left the office whenever I wanted. Now I'm guaranteed to leave with the president, was because of how proud of my office I am and the work that we do. So it's great to hear that you had that experience. Anything else? Oh, yes. So a hate crime is, as I mentioned, so it has, at the federal level, it's a crime, right? There's a crime that's committed and it's motivated by bias. Therefore, it's a hate crime. Anything that, a hate incident might include First Amendment protected activity. I think about I made friends with the U.S. Attorney in Charlottesville, the Western District of Virginia. He was talking about, of course, the march and that we saw in the video there. And then, of course, there was the follow-on driving of and that was all essentially, unless someone was trespassing or didn't have a permit, that wouldn't rise to the federal level anyway, but that was probably not a crime. It was probably protected First Amendment activity, at least at the federal level, to march, even if you have views that are disgusting. But when someone drives their car through counter demonstrators and injures and kills them, then that's a hate crime, motivated by bias, and it's a crime. Just an event. I think I've heard different words used for that: incident, event, and that. And I think those are either they're the universe, and then crimes are a subset of them, or they're to distinguish between hate crimes and hate incidents. And I'm not the stat person, but the ADL probably has a view on that.
Could you make a distinction between hate speech and free speech and,
Oops.
and when it's a call to violence, is that allowed or not allowed?
So call to violence is not allowed. We are finding it very difficult to figure out where the Supreme Court and the other federal courts think that line is drawn. So at some point, something becomes an actionable threat where we can prosecute someone for a threat. There's also language out there that arguably is a call to violence, but it may not be specific enough to constitute a threat for what a federal court will recognize. I can tell you that the federal government has, the executive branch, has not won on that issue the last couple Supreme Court cases. So I'm hesitant to say, one, exactly where that line is drawn, or two, that, if at some point, if you threaten someone, then it is a crime, and if it's, based on bias and fits one of these statutes, we can prosecute it for that. And things like if it's over the internet, if it's over the phone, helps with federal jurisdiction. But at some point, people are allowed to engage in speech that I would think of as fairly violent, potentially violent. They would concern me if it was made about me or my family, but it doesn't cross the line into a threat that can be prosecuted under federal law. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks, Ray.
Thank you so very much. Thank you, U.S. Attorney Talbot, for taking the time from your very busy schedule to come meet with us all today. We really appreciate you. We appreciate the knowledge that you shared, and we really feel that it'll make a difference in our community, so thank you. Okay. Dr. Leah Hibble is a professor of human development and family studies at UC Davis. She studies the impact of stressors like discrimination, violence, and poverty on children and families. Over the past 3 years, she has been educating Davis School District staff on anti-Semitism and working with district leadership to keep anti-Semitism out of the ethnic studies curriculum. Hard job, very hard job. Thank you. She is also a member of Congregation Beit Chaverim's Countering Anti-Semitism Committee. It is my pleasure to present Leah Hibble.
you so much for the introduction. Thank you for the welcome. Thank you for the technical assistance. I actually first, if it's okay, would love to try and answer a little bit of your question before I go into my presentation. So I think that there's both a psychological answer to your question of what makes somebody susceptible to committing acts of violence and what makes somebody susceptible to conspiracy theories. And then I think there's also a sociological answer to your question of looking at sort of like what's going on in the moment in history and sort of the political culture. And I think that in answer to the sociological question, we're living in a time of intense political polarization, and the rhetoric and discourse within this country is very much at a place where people are looking to blame. And so I think that sort of political place, we're also seeing rising income inequality, crisis of healthcare and pandemic, and so all of these sort of historical things that are going on, I think is probably more so than the psychological piece of what's driving the increase in anti-Semitism that we're seeing right now. So I'll now go into what I was going to talk about, which I hope is a little bit empowering. Hopefully it's coming from a place of, now what do we do? So we've heard a lot about hate and increase in violence, and I hope that we don't leave this conversation feeling really defeated. And that was part of the question of that you so wonderfully asked of, like, what do we do? And so hopefully here what I'll talk about is places where you can feel like you can connect with your communities to hopefully make a difference and reduce anti-Semitism. So before I get started, I first just want to shout out my committee members. So Harriet Gaddisman is the chair of the Countering Anti-Semitism Committee that I also sit on at Congregation Bet Havrim, Stanley Young, also Nancy Lazarus, and not present today is David Siegel and Carla Levin, who have been just provided tons and tons of support. Anything that I'm going to be talking about today, especially sort of the second half of what I'm going to be talking about, I could not have done without the amazing help of this committee. So I first just want to acknowledge that.
You speak into the mic.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. So in this presentation, I'm going to be talking about some events and actions that I've been involved in, but I really want to highlight sort of two key pieces that I hope you see as takeaways of things that you can sort of embody and think about, again, when you go into your own communities. And one of those is building relationships, and the other is promoting education. These have been core tenets in all the work that we have done, and I think that these tenets have been critical in making progress in combating anti-Semitism. And so as I talk about the work that we've been involved in, I'm going to keep bringing it back to these two pieces of building relationships, building community, and providing education. So first I'm going to talk about the work that I've done with my local school district. So Randy, when you said ethnic studies, I sort of heard things in the audience. So it's possible that some of you know that there has been anti-Semitism within the ethnic studies curriculum. Ethnic studies is an academic field which seeks to elevate marginalized voices, to more fully discuss experiences of both persecution but also resistance of racial and ethnic minority groups. Ethnic studies is an important counter-narrative to the current American history curriculum that largely focuses on wealthy white Christian experiences. All of that is amazing and important for our students to learn. However, there have been groups within ethnic studies who have worked to incorporate anti-Semitic content into the curriculum. So in 2021, my district put together an advisory board to hear from the community of what they wanted to hear, what they wanted incorporated into their ethnic studies curriculum. And so I applied and was selected to serve onto the Ethnic Studies Advisory Board. I had heard that there was anti-Semitism in ethnic studies, and so I joined this group with sort of the sole internal goal of keeping anti-Semitism out of ethnic studies. And I will say, anti-Semitism absolutely was there. Being in that committee was incredibly difficult. There was anti-Semitic comments that would happen, and we were all on Zoom. It would happen quickly. There'd be little sort of place to step in and counter. People were, chiming in with all sorts of stereotypes and tropes, though mostly that was coming from community members. So I tried connecting and having side conversations with district members. Mostly anti-Semitism was not coming from school district members. It wasn't coming from our teachers. It wasn't coming from district leadership. And so I reached out to 2 teachers that were on this committee and said, hey, do you want to go for a walk and just talk about ethnic studies, what your perspective is, what you see this curriculum turning into? And so we did. We went on 2 walks together and just connected as people. We just built that community. That first walk, it was just making that connection, that human connection. And the second walk is when I started talking about the Jewish experience and anti-Semitism. And after building that relationship, she then was somebody that became, 2 teachers, one in particular, that really started to check in with me after meetings. How was that meeting? What are you seeing that's going on? Just by having those conversations, building that community, we were able to move the mark, at least with one person. And then I did that with district leadership as well. I met and made connections with district leadership, trying to talk about the Jewish experience, trying to talk about anti-Semitism. But again, on a one-on-one basis, building those connections and relationships. And through these meetings, I then became a connection, a place that the district would reach out to when anti-Semitic events happened within the district, which sadly we know happen on a somewhat regular basis. So something would happen, a child would send out a Hitler meme through district email, and so the teachers would find out about it and they would reach out to me to figure out how they're supposed to respond. So just by creating those relationships, we now became a trusted source of helping them combat anti-Semitism. And through those connections, I actually helped to work with them on creating policy on how to respond to identity-based harm. And when these incidents happen, I would reach out to my own community groups, to people that were in education, to people that did anti-Semitism outreach, because none of us can be anti-Semitism experts unless you're at the ADL. Excellent. But for most of us in the community, it's so difficult. You can't be an expert on the Jewish experience. You can't be an expert on anti-Semitism. You can't be an expert in advocacy. You can't be an expert in curricular development. That's just beyond any one person's ability. So we reach out, we build connections, and together we can start to move the needle. So, for example, now in Davis Joint Unified, if students are exposed to hate, there is now not always perfect policy, but policy in place on how to respond. And so one is identifying the students that have been directly harmed, and then that broader community. So that the PowerPoint that we just saw was a perfect example. When you have identity-based harm, it reverberates through the community. You cannot just talk to the one child that was exposed, and you cannot just talk to the children that were perpetuating the hate. It needs to be a community-wide discussion. And parents need to be involved as well. So first, identifying who's been harmed and how to work towards repair within those multiple communities, and engaging with parents as well. Before, we used to get an email to say, Davisville Unified condemns hate in all of its forms, and this is what happened in one of the schools. Now what they're starting to do is include resources. They now name anti-Semitism or name anti-Black hate. They talk about what the incident was, and they provide resources for parents to continue that education for their kids, so that parents not just know what happened, but know how to talk to their students as well. So around the same time, a number of congregants at Congregation Bet Havrim had approached the board, asking to create a committee specifically with the goal of working towards countering anti-Semitism. And so this started the formation of the Countering Anti-Semitism Committee at Congregation Bet Havrim, again, who I announced my fellow members that are here today. So our congregation has done things that I'm sure your congregations have done as well, which is increasing security, building fences, increasing lighting, having people patrol. But this provides some safety and security, but it doesn't stop this spread of hate that we're seeing in the community. So our goal is to work at stopping, to spread that hate. One of our members, Alan Brownstein, says to create a cultural soil in our community in which anti-Semitism cannot take root. So that is our goal, and that's what we're working towards. And we strongly view community building and providing education, again, building relationships, providing education as core pieces of how we're going to do this. So now together, once I got onto this committee, we started meeting with DJUSD, with the district leadership again as well, and through our suggestions, all ethnic studies teachers in our curriculum took the ADL anti-bias training, and they even formed a book club where they read Deborah Lipstadt's Anti-Semitism Here and Now and discussed that book together. But we also know that we can't just do outreach. We can't just work with other communities. We need to start at home. Like I said, none of us can be experts in anti-Semitism. We can't all take that on. We can't all be full experts in Jewish history. And so the first thing that we did is we worked with our own community. We put on a presentation to talk about what anti-Semitism is, to define anti-Semitism, and to talk about the long history and shifts and changes in anti-Semitism to match the culture of the times. Provide basic education on anti-Semitism. We then outlined recent local anti-Semitic events and briefly touched on national and social media-based movements. We were rough. It wasn't perfect. We're learning this just as we're teaching it, right? We're community members. I have a PhD. It's not in Jewish studies, and it's not in anti-Semitism. None of us on this committee are experts, but we're passionate about combating anti-Semitism, and so we're digging into this area to learn more. We're trying to educate our community members. We also held a teen event called Being Jewish on a College Campus. And we brought in a panel of 5 UC Davis Hillel students who spoke in our sanctuary about the resources, services on college campuses, and ways to find other Jewish students, ways to celebrate holidays, and what to do if there's an anti-Semitic event. Once we started to feel like we were developing some expertise and we wanted to then take, as Harry would say, take this show on the road. So we wanted to be able to reach out to other communities. And we started with our own networks. Again, places where we already have relationships and build on those relationships. Alan Brownstein is a respected constitutional law professor, and through him we presented at the Yolo County Courthouse the Bench Bar Committee, a committee of local judges and lawyers. Our presentation was well attended, it was well received, and there was genuine interest in the people that were in attendance to know what they should do. How can they help, right? There are allies out there. If we can make those connections, build on our communities, and provide that education. We next reached out to the Yolo County Ecumenical Ministry, a group of mostly Christian faiths, but also has Muslim and Sikh representation. Our presentation with this group was short. We mostly were there as a place to answer questions, to allow the ministers and faith leaders to ask us questions about anti-Semitism and our experiences. Again, people that, not everybody there, but a lot of people that were there wanted to connect with us, and we said that we would be willing to go into their congregation and talk about anti-Semitism. And one of the groups took us up on this offer. Davis Unified Methodist Church invited us to speak at their congregation in their sanctuary, and so we're going to be there in the beginning of October. Again, our main goal is education. Our presentation will be roughly 1 hour long. We'll break it up into 3 main sections. First, education on the Jewish people. There's often a misunderstanding of our identity because we are an ethno-religious group. Christians often assume that we are Christians that go to a different church or Christians that don't believe in Christ. But we're fundamentally different. An ethno-religious group is fundamentally different than a religious group because of our peoplehood, our tribe, our nation, our ethnic identity. So we will start there. Those tropes that we first heard about, most of them, some of them are about Judaism. Most of them are not about Judaism. They're against us as a people, and we have to identify ourselves as a people for people to be able to understand anti-Semitism. We're an ancient people that have maintained our practices despite being exiled from our homeland, oppressed in numerous host lands, and these experiences have shaped who we are. So we'll also give them an overview of Jewish history. For the rest of the time, we will define and describe anti-Semitism in its many forms. And at the end of the show, we will show this slide, a call to action. The first step that you can see on here is education. So we build that bridge, we come in, we create community with people that are allies and interested in hearing from us, and we provide education. We provide them with the tools to be allies. As we heard, there's more anti-Semites, or we now live in a time where people can get their message out to more people than there are Jews in this world. There's 14 million Jews in this world. The majority of celebrities have more Twitter, Instagram, whatever followers on social media. We cannot fight this fight alone. We need to reach out, make connections, and educate. We hope to meet with more groups to discuss who we are as Jews, why Jews feel vulnerable and threatened, and how our entire community can learn from each other and work together to prevent anti-Semitism from festering and poisoning our society. Our mission is to counter anti-Semitism in its earliest stages. We want, again, I just love that quote from Alan, and so I'm going to read it one more time. Our goal is to create a cultural soil in our community in which anti-Semitism cannot take root.
Leah, I love your passion. Thank you so much. We're very grateful that you came to share this today. It's so evident the hard work that you've done. I think we'll do, if anyone has questions, maybe since we're running a little late, maybe we can do it after in our little schmooze session. I do want to say one more thing to Leah, that you really do encourage others to join in, and you're a great example of activism, so thank you. Liz Igra is president and founder of the Central Valley Holocaust Educators Network, known as CAVEN, is dedicated to supporting teachers in effectively implementing a Holocaust curriculum that meets California's social studies and language arts standards. It is my pleasure to present Liz. Here she comes. Liz, did you want to come up to the microphone? It's right here where I'm standing. We're bringing it down. Okay. Fluidity at our best. Charles is doing a wonderful job.
The man who makes it all happen. First of all, thank you for all the speakers who have said so much important stuff and shared it with us. And I feel at home. This is my home. Mosaic Law has been my home since I came to Sacramento a long, long time ago. And Central Valley Holocaust Educators Network started on this campus. And, but we didn't establish our resource library till a little later. And we established a memorial garden that I invite you to visit, maybe tonight or another time. I really don't need this. You can have this. So that's okay. I can click. Okay. So Central Valley Holocaust Educators Network, CVHAN, is dedicated to supporting teachers. CVHAN supports teachers in effectively implementing Holocaust curriculum that meets California social studies and language arts standards, with an understanding for the constraints that teachers face. We help them respond to a variety of challenges that this complex curriculum presents. Beyond our training and supporting Holocaust education in schools in our region, CVHAN community outreach includes Kristallnacht community remembrance, interfaith outreach, military and school presentation, teacher workshops, and pre-service teacher education program that we are in the process of expanding. And I hope that UC Davis will open its doors to us. So Kristallnacht is a community event, whole community event. People from all walks of life are invited to our Kristallnacht presentations. Those are not just remembrance of Kristallnacht, these are educational programs, and each one adds a small piece of that history to the whole community. Our speakers are knowledgeable educators, authors, such as Devin Naar, who wrote a book, a definitive book on Holocaust on the Greek islands. We are deeply connected to the interfaith community, both in large groups
and individuals, small groups who visit our library and are presented with a program specifically for them. And this is last year's, this past presentation. We also provide education to the armed services, particularly the Beale Air Force Base. I was there 15 years ago, and since then, people who are members of our second-gen group, would you please stand up? I want to give you credit. Second-gen people, please stand up. Yay, come on. I can see more. Have taken on presentations. On this year's presentation, I discovered that the Beale Air Force Base cadet program is about to include Holocaust education in their curriculum, and I plan to be part of that effort. We give talks to large groups. This is a large group that I presented to, and this is a whole school presentation. It gives you an idea of the size of the crowd that benefit from our presentations. This is like just last March, I presented to a school in Roseville, which was just the whole 8th grade. Now, I rely, and all of you second gens, listen up. I really rely on the second gen. As you have heard, my generation is about to collapse, disappear. Not ready yet, but. You can't hear me. You know, I use my school voice, and I expect that everybody can hear. So I rely on my second-gen people to follow in, to do the education. These are not random people off the street. They have been trained to be speakers in schools. They support their talks with historical documentation, and they're very impactful. And the audiences vary. I'm particularly proud of Karen Zorman. Where is she? Way back. Okay. So Karen Rubin, member of C.V. Hen's second gen cohort, presented her father's history at the inaugural commemoration of Yom HaShoah at the National Second World War Museum in New Orleans. So the outreach of the second gens is immense. Our second gens presented classrooms. On the right on the left of the screen is Judy Panetone. She spoke at El Camino High School this year. And below, I spoke to a group of 8th graders at Sutter Middle School. So this is some of the things. The thing I am most proud of and intent on spreading further, and now I'm addressing the people at UC Davis. By the way, I have presented to the ethnic community there, sponsored by the Health Services Department, probably 3 years in a row. These are pre-service teachers at Sacramento State University. These are people who will be teaching for the next 20, maybe 30 years. And we teach them both the how to teach and what to teach. Teaching this subject is very difficult.
And you have to get to know your students, you have to know their families, and there is a process. And you never teach it quite the same way, because the students you get will be different every year. So the pedagogy and the content of that course make a huge difference in how and what is taught in schools for many years to come. We are in the process of engaging other districts, other universities and colleges in presenting such a course in the teacher preparation program. Now, much has been said about responses to anti-Semitism. And as people were speaking, I thought it was important to note and distinguish between types of incidents. Is it an ignorant offense, a provocation, or a threat? Not every anti-Semitic event is the same, and we need to be able to identify it, because sometimes it's best to ignore rather than amplify their message. So how we respond to an anti-Semitic event or action needs to be really well thought out. Most anti-Semitic events are in the category of ignorant offense. People are ignorant of what they're doing. The kid who draws an anti-Semitic a star or a Nazi symbol on a desk is not the same person who is threatening somebody with a gun. And so we need to know how we respond, and we help teachers and schools respond to that on an individual basis. There was a teacher at one of the schools who displayed a Nazi flag amongst other flags. At the same school, there was a large swastika on the baseball field. How do we respond to that? And I must give credit to our young people. Most of them went to Shalom School, who responded, and CBHEN responded by identifying and finding ways to bring Holocaust education to that district. The teacher who displayed the Nazi flag is no longer teaching. We had the support of the Jewish Federation, and I really appreciate all the support of the whole JCRC in the Federation. Thank you, Willie. Thank you, everybody. And that helps us respond to ignorance and events. I would appreciate if people would come up with questions that I hope I can answer. This is a huge topic, and I just let you know what we do, because I feel ignorance is really at the bottom of it. There are fewer people who would commit the acts they're doing if they truly understood the power of hate in general and power of anti-Semitism in particular. And so I do believe that CBHEN is on the path, and with everybody's help here, we'll continue our work. Please.
Thank you. Sorry. If people have questions for Leah as well as you, perhaps they can field that in our schmooze session. So I just wanted to say you've done great work in our Jewish community. You've made lots of sacrifices, and we really appreciate all your hard work. Thank you. I have it right now. Sorry. Liz wants to thank somebody who did something extraordinary. And then I just have a few closing comments, and we'll be finished with this wonderful program.
So I want to thank Jonathan Lightman. Jonathan Lightman provided context and amazing experience to my students from Sac State. They came and he presented them the history of anti-Semitism that I don't think I have ever done as well. And more, he brought them into the sanctuary. And these were people who have never, I don't have any Jewish students. I didn't. And Jonathan introduced them to the Torah. They actually experienced and were encouraged to speak with him and ask questions. And that is a piece of teacher education that needs to be included in our teacher training. Thank you, Jonathan. You did a wonderful job.
Thank you to all of our speakers this evening. You've really made a difference in educating our Jewish community. Thank you, each one of you. We as JCRC wanted to have an event to learn, and you are exactly what we envisioned, so thank you very much. Collectively, you've given us tools to work with and empowered us as a community. Thank you for helping us meet our goals this evening. Now, we all need to work together to create, as Leah would say, I love this saying, a cultural soil where anti-Semitism can't take root. We leave here with more tools than we came with, and I encourage us to work together to plan the work, and then we can work the plan. I invite you all to our social hall, which is right behind you, for a little schmooze and nosh, and thank you all for coming this evening.